everyone. I'm Michaela Parker, founder and executive director of the Academic Data Science Alliance, or ADSA. And I'm here to welcome you to our first ever Poolside Chat, a summertime play on the fireside chat. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Steve Van Tuyl, one of our program managers here at ADSA, about his experiences using the LLM ChatGPT to help him do a research project over the last few months. Steve, welcome to the Poolside Chat.
Yeah, so I'm Steve. I'm one of the program managers at ADSA, and one of the things that I sometimes do is work on projects with the community to pull data and information together and distill it for community consumption and perusal. And we have a couple of big projects happening right now. One of them is looking at how the competencies we expect from a master's degree or a degree in data science, how those match up to workforce needs. So this is sort of a big project that we've had going for a little while, and we'll get to that. And then we have another sort of parallel project running with Schmidt Sciences and the U.S. Research Software Engineer Association to look at the current state of AI in the research software engineer and kind of like data workplace. So how are people using AI and so on and so forth. And both of those projects came crashing together a couple of months ago when I realized that we needed to start kicking off some of the data analysis on that first project I mentioned, and that we had been funded by Schmidt to look at the use of generative AI in the workplace. It turns out that I had never really had much of an opportunity to use generative AI in the workplace before. I had always been sort of like conceptually skeptical for a number of reasons about using generative AI for work, but it never engaged. And then we had this Schmidt project come up and this opportunity to do some analysis. And I thought, if we're going to study how people are using this in the workplace, maybe I should dive in and do the same. So we had both of these projects kind of crash together, which created an opportunity for me to dive in and start using some generative AI for work.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of months and I've got some feelings about it.
Yeah, I've been sensing those feelings on our one-on-one meetings. And now that Steve has given us some background on why we decided to hold this poolside chat, I think we should maybe start at the high level with some of those feelings, and then we can get into more of the nitty-gritty. Because in talking with you and messages over the last few months, I get the sense this is a bit of a roller coaster. So maybe you could just tell us, from a user, what are your kind of vibes around using an LLM to do your research?
Yeah, so I think maybe a touch more background on what my situation is might be helpful. So I come to the work that I do now with ADSA from library and information science background, and then prior to that, ecological research background. So I've got like some, foundation in statistics and computing work. It's a little bit dated, but I thought, some of the analysis that we needed to do for this project was a little bit beyond my ability and beyond my sort of knowledge set. And so the LLM was super helpful in helping me kind of take a more expansive approach to the types of analysis that I could attempt or work through. That said, like, it's a really cool toy. It's a really cool tool to use, but it's really complicated and it's not intuitive in a lot of ways. And I've found myself, like you said, sort of on this roller coaster of ups and downs, and sort of wondering why I was using the tool in the first place and why I wasn't just trying to learn these methods on my own and so on and so forth. And so there's sort of like a lot of like, there's a big emotional component to this project because as we'll talk about later, there are a lot of considerations to take into account with using these tools.
have to
But
unmute.
yeah, I mean, I think that at a high level, what I've experienced is that using these tools for things like scientific coding and data analysis is just as frustrating as it was when I didn't have an LLM to help me do things like write code. Because it's a complicated process, right? The questions we're asking are complicated. And even with the wonders of modern computing, it's hard for anyone to sort of navigate a real research question, right? Real research questions have lots of twists and turns, lots of unexpected and unintuitive things you have to take into account. And I think that that really highlighted some of the downsides of these tools, or at least the downsides of the hype that we hear about these tools.
So would you say it's fair to kind of generalize your this high level take as saying that your ability to do scientific coding and statistical analyses was expanded, but not necessarily your skills, if that makes
Yeah, I mean,
sense?
yeah, I think that
You know what I'm saying?
not, yeah, I think that's not unfair. I think that when, so I sort of cringe a little bit when you say that my abilities maybe have been expanded, because I'm
Maybe
not
that's the
sure.
wrong word. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure if my abilities have been expanded exactly because I'm receiving so much assistance from this tool. But
Right.
has my level of comfort with expanding what types of analyses or what types of programming I might attempt, uh, has that expanded a little bit? And the answer is definitely yes. I mean, there was a case that I shared with you yesterday. I was doing some analysis and I expressed, as one does for the LLM, that I was frustrated by how long it was taking to get this data to run through this analysis. And it suggested parallelizing the computation with my multi-core processor in my laptop, something I'd never considered doing. Would have never thought I would be able to do or be able to figure out how to do. And within like 15 minutes, we'd reduced the time it took to run through all of our data by like a quarter. And so, like that was interesting and that was very cool, but I'm not sure that it actually expanded a lot of my skill. Maybe it expanded
Right.
like what I think is possible, which is important too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dig into that more. The promise of this new research assistant of yours.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
have any more specific examples, like around statistics, your statistical analyses, maybe? Like,
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'll say is
go ahead.
that like I have been in many situations, many jobs where writing code for analysis is kind of like on the fringes of the job, right? Like it might be something you need to do, or if you take your analysis to a certain place, you're going to need to start writing code. And I've found over the years that I'm pretty constitutionally immune to learning how to write code. It's really hard for my head to kind of like structure these things and get and get something to work well. And so from that perspective, I really feel like there's a lot of promise here, right? Like to me, learning how to code and learning how to do it effectively is blocked from my work because I don't do it that often. But when I need to do it, I need to do it, without too much delay. So I don't do it that often, and I'm sort of like afraid of it. It's a thing that I have a really hard time with. And so from that perspective, the ability to sort of communicate to the large language model in just words what it is that I want to do and then fine tune it is really incredible, incredibly powerful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about like as a resource, like moving away from coding and more towards the types of analyses you wanted to do?
Yeah, that was the other really big thing that I found to be useful here is that I work in this weird room in my house, which is not normally next to a swimming pool. But it's like a little room, and I'm not affiliated with an institution. I know a bunch of statisticians and data scientists and stuff like that. But so that I could like reach out to collaborators close collaborators and receive assistance in like defining what types of statistical analyses are appropriate, um, thinking about like the implications of a statistical outcome or an analytical outcome. Like, what does this mean uh, in a kind of like help me interpret the output way? Like all of that is super helpful. And like I said, my situation is that I'm not really in a position to walk down the hall and talk to my friend who's a statistician
Mhm.
about these questions. And so for people who are, I think, in a kind of isolated workspace like this, which I think a lot of people are, and especially in data work, a lot of people are like the only data person on the team. Um, you know, there's opportunity here for these tools to provide statistical consulting, assistance with like, code, pair programming, thinking about analysis, interpretation of results and things like that. So I think it's super useful in that way, as far as you can trust it, right? Like as far as you can know that the information that it's giving you is sensible, which is its own trick.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hinted at that, and maybe we can delve into those concerns now, where this isn't something we would necessarily recommend someone with no statistical background or no understanding of what the LLM is suggesting would be able to use these tools effectively or even in a way that's trustworthy. So, can you like delve into those concerns? And I know you have many others too, so we can start there.
Yeah, so there's sort of a like I have a lot of trust issues as a human, but it doesn't help to interact with this LLM that very obviously in some cases, but not obviously in a lot of cases, makes errors that you have to catch, right? You have to sort of be ready to catch these things as they come flying by. And I think that there's this sort of hyped notion that you could, write a prompt to ChatGPT or whatever the model is and say, I want you to generate this statistical analysis, or I want you to make an app that we can upload to the app store and I can like start making a tons of money off of it. Um, and I think that that is really hyped because, and especially with analysis, because of the sort of twists and turns that we oftentimes find ourselves in when we're doing our research work, right? Like we change directions where like this is the analysis I want to do, and then you start looking and you're like, you know what, this maybe wasn't appropriate, let's move to something else. And with all of those twists and turns, I've found that these models can become really kind of confused. Like the longer the chain of queries that you have, or the larger the analysis pipeline you're trying to run, the more likely it is that this system is going to start kind of, I guess the only way I've been able to describe it to myself is that it starts feeding on itself. It starts like consuming itself. You start getting lots of reference errors, isn't really maybe the right term, but like it'll give you some code and you'll run it and you'll find an issue and you'll give back sort of a query to make a correction, and it won't understand after a while which version of the code you're talking about, right? So there's sort of an element of it getting lost with these long chains of queries and analysis tools. And so that's a really big concern because you have to catch it. It's not going to admit to you that it's invented something or used placeholder values instead of real values, or made some assumptions about what you've done. And so there's sort of an anxiety to using it for actual work because you have to try to catch it and prevent it from slipping errors past you.
Yeah.
Um,
You had a nice example when we talked through this yesterday or the day before, um,
yeah.
about it wanting to go back to a snapshot. And I don't know if that's the right term for a visualization, I think. Can you
Yeah.
walk us through that example?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think that is that using this LLM is driving me towards is better software writing practices, including version control. And this is a great example of this. So when I give it some code to look at, to review, for example, and say, hey, I think there may be some problems here or redundancies in the code. Could you check through, do a little bit of a code review for me? And it looks through the code and we make some corrections. And then I say, okay, this is the good working version of the code. This is the one that I want to go back to if we run into a problem. And I do that a lot. But ChatGPT, after a while, had a hard time understanding, or I had a hard time prompting it to remember which thing it was supposed to remember. So I would say like, okay, this is the new snapshot. This is the new best code. And then 20 minutes later would realize that in the kind of back and forth, it was referring to code that we had written 2 days ago, still thinking that was the snapshot, right? And so you have this like version control issue, which I think gets to this other, I think, an interesting point, which is that if I were to continue to use these tools, it's going to drive me to start having better, essentially open science best practices, right? It's going to drive me to start using actual version control so that I'm not relying on the model to remember. It's going to drive me to do better at commenting code, or at least making sure that my code is well commented so that someone can remember what is happening, right? And so especially like because I'm not writing some of the code, having those comments in there is helpful for me to kind of walk through what the code is doing so that I know it's doing what I think it's doing. But yeah, I think that was maybe the example you were asking about. Another concern that I have is this sort of trade-off that we have between this sort of the expansiveness of skill, like what you maybe are able to do or attempt with the assistance of a model like this. So the trade-off between that expansiveness of skill and your own personal expertise, right? So I'm sitting here using this tool to help me write code and do some analysis. And all throughout the discussion, I'm thinking to myself, am I learning how to do this, or am I offloading this work onto this tool? And I think that we're somewhere in between, right? I am learning some things. I'm learning that you can, multi-thread on your processor and parallelize a process, which is very cool. But if I were to sit down in front of, a text editor right now, I couldn't type that code out. I couldn't even remember what that package was that we were using. And I think that part of the reason that happened, part of the reason that trade-off happens is because what I'm doing right now, which is I think is what a lot of people are doing right now with these tools, is they're just trying to like overlay them onto the work they already do, with some assumptions about how well the tool is going to work, not leaving a lot of time for actual training or professional development around how to use the tool well, right? And so there's a lot of experimentation, and from discussions that I've had with other people, there's a lot of frustration in some cases that this thing doesn't work the way that I wanted it to. It's worthless. Let's kick it out the door. And I think that the conversation is a little bit more complicated than that, but that it, again, with the hype train, like it really feels like people are saying you can just pick these things up and use them and you're going to have glorious results. But the reality is, just like any other tool that we use for our work, we need to stop and take time to learn how it works. We need to, find training to do. We need to sort of read the documentation, which maybe gets me to one of my last concerns here, is that we don't have a lot of those things. We don't have a lot of good training. We don't have a lot of good documentation. We don't have a lot of good use cases for how to use these things in specific work settings, right? So there's plenty of blog posts and things on LinkedIn or whatever out there about how cool these things are or how terrible they are, right? Sort of like unnuanced discussion about these tools. But what I really think is important to generate or co-create with a community is, as a researcher of some kind, or a software engineer, or a social scientist, or whatever it is, how do I implement these tools in my work setting, right? I can't just sort of take this general information that's out there, a lot of which is hyped, and make assumptions about the specifics of the work that I'm doing. And so I think that we really need ways to onboard people into using these tools in the workplace, and finding ways to create support, whether it's documentation or communities of practice for people who are using these tools so that they're not doing it, just on their own in the weird room in their house that sometimes looks
Or
like a swimming pool.
or we bring back that paperclip widget
Or
from
we bring
Word
back
Perfect.
Clippy, right? We all
Clippy,
remember Clippy. Yeah.
you may be having some
Um,
trouble. Can I help?
right. Looks like you're trying to use generative AI. Um, yeah, so those are sort of my main kind of high level concerns.
Hmm.
And I don't think that those are super original or new, but I think that the main thing, and I just mentioned this, but the main thing that I think is troubling me about this is the lack of community specific support for the type of work that I'm doing for the type of application of the model, right? Like I can find
Right.
lots of communities right now who are using ChatGPT for Dungeons and Dragons. There's tons of information out there about that, but relatively little information about actually implementing these in the workplace for statistical analysis and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you also have some higher level societal concerns and anxieties, but we're getting a lot of great comments in the chat right now, specifically about what you've been touching on. So I just want to call out to the audience, Andrew, Cirrus, Angela, if any of you want to come off mute and tell us a little bit about your experiences,
Yeah.
that would be awesome.
So I've been just kind of trying to stay on the frontier edge of these things because I think it's fun. I was a data science fellow at the Berkeley Institute for Data Science for 3 years when I was doing my PhD in sociology. And at the time, I was an awful coder. I couldn't code at all, but my insight was I could recruit undergraduate computer scientists at Berkeley who are brilliant to get academic credit for working on my projects. So I scaled this, and over the course of 5 years, I had 100 undergraduates working on little coding assignments to the point that it was
Amazing.
counterproductive. I was just I was this empire builder at Berkeley with no actual resources other than the human capital, right? So,
Right on.
anyways, for that, I learned how to kind of software engineer to a degree. Like when you want to scrape something out, look for the X path or it'll die or whatever else. You learn this kind of tacit knowledge over time. But the main thing that I learned from that I feel is pretty applicable here is just really scoping out small projects where they're learning how to do it, testing it, having very specific parameters for what you're looking for. And in a weird way, I feel like doing that, working with these undergraduate computer scientists has made me really ready for this kind of bot revolution. But the thing that I found is the same thing as you, is no one should be using this for data science unless they are watching every single step and what it's producing, because I've done it and have had these amazing results, and it's because it made them all up. And the way that and then what it does, and this is the actual mechanism that I found, is it will try something, and then if it fails because it doesn't read the data correctly or something else, it'll create a fallback mechanism where it creates synthetic data that is what it would predict to be the data, and it doesn't even tell you about that. So what I've been doing is
Fallbacks.
yeah, so you got to first say every time to search for that and not to do that. But then I've been using Jupyter notebooks and having it right in them. And it's been annoying to be debug so far, but I'm learning how to create a JSON file with the debugging things and creating that. But I think that is the way to move that forward. And just one last thought is I work in a field where there's very little reproducibility. I'm a management professor. And I'm really frustrated by it. And I'm really trying to figure out ways to get this adopted, because there's an incentive not to. If someone can check your work, maybe you did it wrong or something. But I think that the only way forward with LLMs is going to be reproducibility, because otherwise everything's going to be, we're going to have so much AI slop publication we're going to have to root out. There's going to be so much crap, I'm sure of it, without this. So we need to find some way to create a process to make it very easy to make your work reproducible and visible. So anyways, that's my rant, because I've been thinking about this for a long time. So
yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think that we need to. I think it would be very useful to take a reproducibility kind of tack on this issue, right? sort of a lot more nuanced than we're seeing, and say, look, we're gonna use these tools. People are gonna use these tools, and if they are, we'd like them to use them as best as they can for their sake, but also for the sake of the research community. And we already have a framework in place for doing that, which is this kind of reproducibility framework. And so if we can kind of like fuse these two things together, I think we would head in the right direction.
And can I make
And
one more comment? Just sorry, just to
yeah,
push back on one last thing that, and this is the very last one, is like, I really would like to push back on the idea that we're not building skills or learning things working with AI. Actually, I do a lot of work on the maker movement and maker fairs, and I've actually published some work recently on how they make it easy to do hard things and how just kind of learning to be comfortable doing something hard makes it easier to do it. And so when I had an R&R at our top journal, AMJ, they asked for this very complicated statistical analysis that I did not know how to do. And I spent months with AI and textbooks and everything else. And I taught myself on how to code it and everything else. And I was able to do very sophisticated analysis that now I can do in all of my papers. And not because I just like farmed it out to AI, it's because I had to teach me and empower me. So I think there's going to be this bifurcation of those who use it to empower and learn everything they need. And then people are just using it to just phone it in, which eventually will be replaced by robots anyways. So
right. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think that the difficulty that I was seeing was that it was very tempting in a lot of ways and easy in a lot of ways to just sort of flip, right? To flip and say, you know what, I'm gonna just add one more visualization to this chunk of code, and I hope it doesn't break it, instead of splitting it out into its own, like, piece of analysis. And then, like you said about the learning, right? That sort of like gets at that expansiveness, right? That I was talking about before, where I feel like I have more breathing room to learn about these methods and tools. The concern that I run into and that I actually saw in my work is that if I didn't have time to sit down for a month with the textbooks and the tool, it's very easy to just say, you know what, just this one time, I'm just gonna ask the model, just tell me what to do this time. And that, tomorrow after I finish doing the analysis, I'll go back and read a little more, like you kind of can find yourself falling into this place. The last thing that I want to note is about your comments is that I kept writing down behaviors that I felt like the model was exhibiting from my experience working in the research community. And so I had this whole list of them, right? It is an inattentive graduate advisor. It is a really skilled undergraduate software developer who doesn't understand the context, right? It's an intern who, you have communication issues, but that's like all of these things that are frustrating about the research workspace appear in this tool. And so it's not as if those things go away. And I think you're right that your experience working with undergraduates to sort of do chunks of analysis probably prepared you really well to wrestle with these models.
Still incredibly inefficient.
Yes, right. How powerful yet inefficient, like a large diesel truck. Maybe. Anyway, I don't know a lot about trucks. So is there another question in the chat?
The elderly professor with memory issues. I feel like that's the one that comes up for me. Like, I just told you this 5 seconds ago, but you remember 10 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, let's see. So I think we've touched on most of the points in the chat. There was a big +1 from Cyrus on open science, and I think we a little bit talked about that with the reproducibility, but the openness and transparency is something I think we're all going to grapple with, because you don't see behind the curtain what it's trying to do, and there's got to be more ways to dig into those and interpret them. So.
Right. Can I address Andrew's question real quick, or comment?
Yep.
Right. So I think the comment is I saw somewhere that with LLMs, writing code is fast, but reading and understanding the code can take a lot of time. And I think that's true. I think that it gets to this question of interpretability, right? So I'm having the model write something for me. And what I would probably share if I'm sharing something from that is the code that it generates, but I need to be able to interpret it myself in order for other people to interpret it from kind of an open science perspective. And one of the things that I think, that the models seem to do pretty well is reading code and commenting putting comments in, inline comments that sort of discuss what's happening. And that's also something that I felt it's been pretty useful to engage with the model on and say, like, look, when you write this code, I really want you to put contextual comments in and all of that kind of thing. And so that can be helpful. But to the point, yes, they can write code very fast, but you do have to take the time to go back and make sure that it's doing what you think it's doing, and that it's, using the data that you think it's using, and not finding placeholder values as a fallback,
Yeah.
which I think it does pretty often.
Yeah. And so then in the end, maybe it's saving you a little time because you didn't have to write the code initially, but you still got to review it the same as you would review your own code. So
yeah,
it's not like
and
a
that's
miracle
fine,
worker.
right?
It doesn't just generate the
Right.
perfect code.
I mean, it is,
That's
in
the
some
point.
ways it's a miracle worker, but it's also like a mundane schmuck in other ways. And so, again, it's like
Yeah.
a new graduate student, or whatever it is.
Yeah. So Angela had also a comment in here about, and I think this is something that I felt also when we first decided to do this poolside chat, is that there's a lot here to unpack that could be useful for teaching students how to apply these tools, especially at that level of masters of data science students, which feels like it's the right level where they're going to get taught some statistics and coding skills as their foundations, and then how can they appropriately use these tools kind of moving forward in their careers and in their research. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll say that I'm no pedagogical wizard, so I'm just kind of, saying thoughts. But and this is a tactic that I think it's not new because of LLMs. I think it's pretty common out there, but we can identify what are the big problems that the LLM is going to introduce to the conversation about the research or the code or whatever we're trying to learn. Things like hallucination, inventing publications or statistical analyses, or in some cases I've found inventing, R packages to use. It'll be like, here, just put this R
inventing
package
them?
in, and then yeah, just put this package in your list, and it does these things, and then it doesn't, run. It's like, we don't recognize that package, and you're like, hey, and the model's like, lol, JK, that was just a placeholder package I put in for later when we want to do an analysis. And so, like, all of these kinds of problems that you might run into, calling the wrong package or whatever, are problems that you're going to run into with this code. And so, like, it maybe seeding analyses or analysis projects with things that are going to bring these problems to the forefront, so that the student can be sort of forced to experience some aspect of using an LLM in their work that creates a problem that they then have to resolve.
Yeah.
Right. I think that the like interpretability of what's going on can be challenging. It's total black box, right? And so introducing the issues around it being hard to interpret what the model is doing and that it's a black box, introducing those issues into the process of doing analysis, I think, is probably really useful. Because like other issues that you run into, bad data, outliers, all of these things, we need to kind of slow ourselves down and consider those things as we're doing our analysis, and not just make assumptions about that everything's hunky-dory. So I think there's a lot of room for introducing students to the kinds of problems that these things could generate. And I don't mean like the big societal problems. Those are all problems that we also need to consider, but I mean like it's making up values because it couldn't read in the input data set.
Yeah. Well, Megan has a comment on something that we were going to sort of wrap up with anyway, which is backing out of these really nitty-gritty pragmatic issues with the tools and reflecting back onto some of your own personal reservations. And I think some of that also overlaps with something you just hinted at, which are the large environmental, societal issues that have been discussed at length by many others, but still remain. And so I don't know if you want to just take a moment to talk a little bit about that sort of higher level reservations and concerns with these tools?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that I went through a few stages of emotional processing with the tool, right? I kind of started like a lot of people do, which is poking it with a stick and seeing what it does. But then as soon as I started really using ChatGPT in earnest and like Copilot in R in earnest, I started asking myself questions about was this allowing me to do my work better, right? This is one of the things that we hear. And then I started following that with questions about what do we mean by better, right? We mean faster. I think that in this case, the analysis probably was a little bit faster, but not much because of all of this sort of learning curve of using the tool.
Checks
Was
and
it
balances,
cheaper?
yeah.
Was this cheaper? No, it was not cheaper. Was the quality higher? Maybe. I hope.
You were
Was
able to do
the
some analyses you might not have otherwise,
Yeah,
right?
right. So that sort of
Okay,
gets
so
like,
there's some of that.
was the work more expansive than it might have been? The answer is definitely yes. Right. And so like it kind of like makes me realize that when we say a tool or these tools are going to make things better or faster or something, it's important to remember that that term better or faster has a lot of axes to it, right? Do we mean cheaper? Do we mean faster? Do we mean more expansive? All of these things. Keeping things like that in mind, very, I think, pretty pragmatic. Like, am I doing this faster? Also kind of spin out into these really esoteric thoughts, or at least I do, such as by using a large language model to help me write code, am I somehow like incrementally contributing to job loss to the large language model, right? Like ADSA wasn't going to hire a statistical consultant to work with us on this. So it's not like we directly didn't hire someone because we have a large language model, but now that I've got my toes in the pool and I can feel the temperature of the water, it's like, okay, maybe we'll do this again for the next one, right? And so at sort of a population level, trying to talk statistics here, like, are we incrementally, every time we use these things, are we incrementally contributing to some kind of workplace displacement or job loss? And then, the myriad of ethical concerns that are out there about copyright issues, intellectual property issues, environmental issues, the sort of workplace disruption issues. These are all kind of like big ethical ideas that we need to take into account. They're all also really nuanced and complicated. And so I guess I would note that the hype machine for these tools doesn't just talk about what the tool can do. It talks about the hype machine kind of works on all sides of the discussion, right? So there's a lot of hype about the environmental concerns, but there's also a lot of nuanced discussion about the details of those concerns and how much we should be worried about them. I mean, I think that we do need to worry about that. I think that we always need to worry about energy use and water use and so on. But we also can't get caught up in this hype train about what's going on there, because I think it does a disservice to the discussion to not be nuanced about what's happening.
Yeah, you had some example, and I don't recall now if you felt like this was a fair comparison, but that there is some other side of the coin. And let's preface this with my PhD is in oceanography. I'm very much pro supporting and protecting our environment, but I hadn't really thought about the energy impact lens in this other way that you had brought up, which is to say, if you had all these folks that had to drive into an office and, you have all the energy costs of that building, which are, when you're not at home instead. And so there's other ways of calculating the energy cost, I guess. And can you just remind me how that looked? I don't recall it now.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the study was. I think it had something to do with printing, like as a service, right? So like doing layout and printing like a magazine.
Right.
And somebody had done some analysis. It was not, just like a blog post. It was a peer-reviewed article, so maybe that lends us some credence. But they did some analysis that suggested that AI-driven printing was less carbon intensive than human-driven printing for all of those reasons, right? And I think that, I have questions in my head about that particular project and its outcomes, but I think that what that does is it highlights the nuance and kind of sector-specific nature of the question, and that it doesn't.
Right.
It's helpful to think of these things at a high level to sort of introduce the idea that, like, hey, we should think about these environmental concerns, but we also, I don't think, should spend a lot of time. Well, I think we should spend more time thinking about what the sector-specific concerns are. If we're statisticians and data scientists and research software engineers, what is the impact that we're having from using these tools, rather than like what's some grand global number that's hard to relate to?
And we're not putting Pandora back in this box, right? The key, I think, to moving forward is also researching and developing more efficient tools and models, right?
Yeah.
That's
I do
something
want
we
to
need
note
to keep in mind.
Carl's comment here.
Carl, hey,
cheaper is
Carl.
loaded, obviously, because it depends on where the cost is going to.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that one of the things that I think is really valuable to consider is a comment that I heard from a research software engineer a few weeks ago, who said essentially, like, it's important to remember that when we say this is going to be cheaper, it's not because necessarily the people doing the work will be able to do more work or be able to do it more efficiently. Like, the cheaper that we're looking at from like an industry perspective here is hiring fewer humans, right? And so I think it's important, again, to sort of like keep that in context, right? Cheaper can mean a lot of different things, and one of the things that it means in this case is hiring fewer people, which is its own concern, right? It doesn't mean that you have to like keep every job around, even though technology surpasses it. But it does mean it pays to be careful and thoughtful about what happens in the choices that you're making with the technology you use.
We have some time. Carl, if you're on and you want to unmute and push back or add further comment, please jump in.
So it's interesting you say that, Steve, because I've heard lots of different conversations right around the cheaper, right? Some of it is that it's making it easier and faster so that the given workers can do more, right? So it's not necessarily getting rid of workers, it's letting workers achieve more things. But there are also there's also some business models that say, oh, it's now cheaper because now we can get rid of people. But I think there's also questions around, like, cheaper can, like you said, cheaper can mean a lot of different things, right? Like maybe now it's I don't have to charge the client for an hour of design layout work because I can do the design layout work in 10 minutes for the same design layout person, whatever they're doing, right? And so now it becomes cheaper, but from the person hiring the designer, it's cheaper. Oh, I only had to pay for 15 minutes. But that cheaper cost goes down the line now because, oh, I only had to hire the design layout person for 15 minutes. Well, now does that company need to employ whoever is hiring design layout people? Do they need to hire as many design layout people? Even if you're sourcing that, even if I am hiring an outside company to do my design layout, and it's cheaper for me to pay for that design layout. It's just there's cascading impacts.
I think that gets to that nuance and sort of tracing the impacts, and that's sort of what I mentioned earlier, Carl, about the sort of, am I contributing incrementally to job loss, right? Like, I only used it for this one project and it took 15 minutes instead of an hour. But those are the hours that make up someone's job. And I think,
can you remind me though, there was another side of the coin for this one too, because you had written that you might have contributed to someone's job gain.
It's possible
Right.
that it could have contributed to job gain too, right? Like, could have contributed to my own job gain, right? You know, if
We'll see about
I,
that.
it's not a threat. It's just that,
Steve's
like,
going elsewhere. Okay.
you know,
I
no, but like, let's say I'm Carl's graduate student and I'm using these models and I'm trying to kind of expand my tool chest so that I can get a job after graduate school, and using the LLM may move me in that direction, right? It may put me in a place where I'm a step ahead of somebody else. And so in that way, like, these things could contribute to job gain, but it's like such a large and complicated system, the workplace, that it's hard to know if we're trying to like figure out net benefit or net cost. I think it's a really difficult thing to trace. And I think that one of the things that gets lost in that kind of discussion about like tracking the minutes that you spent using the LLM versus talking to the design layout person, we lose the discussion about intent, right? We lose the discussion about it at an organizational level or at an institutional level. Why are we choosing to adopt these tools? What do we think we're getting? Are the tools sophisticated and advanced enough at this time, 15 minutes after they've been released? Are they sophisticated enough to do the thing that we are assuming that they can do, which is the work for us or replace employees or, whatever it is? And I think that there isn't, it doesn't feel to me like there's enough information like that out there, of this like critical analysis of the reason for doing it, for using these tools, or how it's going. There's not enough critical analysis of those things. And I think those things are often couched as like, boy, these people are being a real bummer about large language models in the workplace. And I think that, that's okay. I think there's a room in conversations to talk about why you're doing something and consider whether the reason you're doing it is a good reason. There's room to have those conversations and still not feel like you're shutting the door to using the technology. And so I really would stress that it's important to have those kind of like high level intent conversations with everybody in the organization.
It's interesting that you say that. As I'm talking, Trinity is thinking carefully about how we want to use AI in education, and I'm listening to a couple other colleagues talk about that. And I think in education, it becomes really, really clear and obvious what that intent piece is around there, right? That like improper use of the AI can shortchange the student's process of actually learning, because it's making it super easy to skip through the hard thinking and the hard work that is part of the process of building your own knowledge and skill set and discussion. And that I don't know, having not been in corporate America or other pieces, but it seems to me that perhaps some of that distinction of like building up skill set and building up knowledge so that one becomes an expert is not necessarily as clearly thought about outside of academia or outside of the process of education. And that like I've heard it discussed, right, that like one of the things that a lot of the AI has is that AI does a really great job of creating some stuff, but then you have to be an expert to know how to evaluate the stuff that it created. And so how do you get to become an expert? By doing some of the process to get to that creation thing, right? And so if
chicken and the egg.
If what you've done is eliminate all the people doing the grunt work that gets you the expertise so that you can evaluate the easy stuff.
When we talk to our research software engineer colleagues about kind of how this is going in the workplace, this is a big concern that they have, that we'll essentially lose the pipeline. We'll shut off the spigot at the source, right, which is junior research software engineers and students interested in learning how to code because they think it's cool and interesting and a good job. If the intent at a large level is that we don't need a lot of junior software developers because we've got a bunch of senior software developers and a large language model, well, the senior software developers are going to go somewhere at some point. And so you sort of you're generating this demographic cliff for yourself that none of us want. So I think that keeping that pipeline in mind is important, and keeping that pipeline in mind in the context of LLMs being part of the tool set that we use, right? Not in the context of saying, let's just not use them. Because I think,
Right.
like you said, Michaela, the box is open, the Pandora's box is open, and we're not putting the monster back in. You know, but some monsters are friendly and helpful. And so we can make friends with them and just kind of try to keep them contained in that big, you know,
Feed them
plexiglass
regularly.
room they use in the movies, right? We keep the monster contained in there,
Monster
and it's
Incorporated
helpful.
taught us that, like, the right monsters
Perfect.
in the
Yes.
right way, we can feed it with
Perfect.
laughter instead of scaring it,
Exactly.
right?
Perfect.
Exactly.
Did any other people,
Exactly.
I butted in on questions. Other people are on this call. So did other people that were listening have other questions?
Say we have 5 minutes left. Anybody else wants to jump in on this conversation? I love this. I'm almost thinking we should do this quarterly.
Oh boy.
I'm envisioning pumpkin side chat next. Jump in, Cyrus.
I was wondering if there'd be any interest in like having some sort of a meetup or something with people who are using LLMs in their workflows. And it could be either official or casual, but we could blast it through. And honestly, I just love to talk to other people and see how they're doing stuff. Like my GitHub repository has just exploded recently, and I just star so many things, and I have like channels on YouTube I watch and stuff. So I'd love to kind of share best practices and stuff. So I don't know if ADSA is interested, or you all are doing something that's monthly or whatever. I'd be happy to help host it or whatever. If that would be useful.
I would love to
this would
do
be
that.
great. Yeah, I mean, you see how easy it is, right? You jump in when you have something to say, and honestly, yeah, we're recording this, but I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this, and it will only be a growing conversation.
Yeah,
So,
but Cyrus, I think that's a great idea. I think that that's the kind of like domain specific nuance and discussion that I've been seeking, and so I'm hopeful that we can pull something together, and we'll reach out to you, and we can put something up. It'd be awesome.
Thanks for organizing.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, thank you. All right. Any other last parting thoughts, pearls of wisdom? I think if you love this, if you want to see more of it, please let us know, because we never know if we should keep going with these ideas. info@academicdatascience.org. And otherwise, hopefully we'll see you again next time for the pumpkin side chat, which I just made up.
Pumpkin side chat,
now.
very nice. We're good
That's
at Halloween
seasonal.
costumes at Eds.
Oh, we are good at Halloween costumes. Yes.
So we'll see you maybe in October.
The Poolside chat. Thanks, Carl. Yes.
Once again.
See you next quarter. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.